The morning sun painted the Kentucky hills in gold, washing over the pristine white fences and gleaming glass buildings of Elmwood Equestrian Center. The facility stood as a monument to modern horse training, state-of-the-art stables, Olympic-sized arenas, and cutting-edge technology that monitored every breath, every heartbeat of the prized animals inside. Morgan Reynolds stood at the observation deck, her silhouette sharp against the sunlight, arms crossed over her tailored blazer. At 40, she had the posture of someone who had spent a lifetime proving herself. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, not a strand out of place. Everything about her screamed control, and control was what she'd built her reputation on. The numbers from last quarter, she said, not bothering to turn around as her assistant David approached with a tablet. Up 12% from projections. The board is pleased, but Victor still wants more, Morgan finished. When doesn't he? She took the tablet, scanning the reports with practiced efficiency. Elmwood wasn't just a training facility. It was a pioneer in equestrian technology. Motion sensors, biometric tracking, predictive behavior algorithms. Morgan had revolutionized horse training by bringing it into the digital age. Traditional trainers called it cold. She called it progress. Her eyes drifted to the last item on the agenda, the Thunderbolt situation. She felt her jaw tighten. $5 million. That's what the stallion had cost. Thunderbolt was supposed to be the crowning achievement of Elmwood's breeding program. Perfect conformation, impeccable bloodlines, a genetic masterpiece. The problem? He was unrideable, untrainable, a beautiful monster that had injured 3 professional trainers already, and the investors were coming today to see him perform. Get Dr. Wilson on the line, she said, handing back the tablet. Tell him we're moving forward with the demonstration regardless. The main arena buzzed with anticipation. 24 of the country's wealthiest equestrian enthusiasts and potential investors lined the observation deck, champagne flutes in hand. Victor Shaw, chairman of the board, worked the crowd with practiced charm, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting the old money confidence that opened checkbooks. Morgan stood slightly apart, watching the preparations below. Dr. Richard Wilson, Elmwood's head trainer, with 3 Olympic medals to his name, was making final adjustments to Thunderbolt's specialized training equipment. The stallion stood in the center of the arena, a creature of pure midnight, 17 hands of rippling muscle and barely contained fury. Even from this distance, Morgan could see the white of his eyes, the flared nostrils. Thunderbolt wasn't just angry, he was terrified. Magnificent animal, Victor sidled up next to her, lowering his voice. But this is the last chance, Morgan. The board won't tolerate another failure. Either Wilson makes progress today, or we cut our losses. He's worth more than the GDP of a small nation, Victor. We don't just cut losses on an investment like that. Everything has a price, even failure. Victor's smile never reached his eyes, especially failure. The hushed conversations died as Wilson entered the arena. He moved with the confidence of someone used to commanding respect, a wireless microphone clipped to his collar. Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness is the culmination of Elmwood's revolutionary training methods. Thunderbolt represents the pinnacle of equine genetics, and today we'll demonstrate how our proprietary techniques can transform even the most challenging subjects. Morgan watched, her face a practiced mask of confidence. But inside, doubt gnawed at her. Wilson had assured her he could handle the stallion. The sensors, the data, the precise application of pressure and release, science would prevail over nature's chaos. Wilson approached Thunderbolt with measured steps, a specialized training halter in his hands. The stallion's ears pinned back, muscles tensing visibly under his gleaming coat. The key to our method, Wilson continued, his voice carrying through the arena's speakers, is establishing clear boundaries through consistent. Thunderbolt exploded. One moment he was standing still, the next he was a hurricane of hooves and teeth. Wilson barely managed to leap back, the halter flying from his hands as the stallion reared, striking the air where the trainer's head had been seconds before. Gasps rippled through the observation deck. Morgan's fingers dug into the railing. Wilson scrambled backward, his composure shattered. 2 assistants rushed forward with control poles, trying to contain the stallion's fury. Thunderbolt charged the nearest one, sending the young man tumbling into the sand. Get a tranquilizer, Wilson shouted, his microphone broadcasting his panic to the entire arena. The demonstration was unraveling in spectacular fashion. Morgan could feel Victor's eyes on her, could practically hear the board meeting that would follow. $5 million spiraling down the drain in front of their most important investors. Then a movement caught her eye. A man had entered the arena from a side door, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in work clothes. He wasn't part of the demonstration team. It took Morgan a moment to place him. The maintenance man, one of the facility engineers who kept the place running. "Get him out of there," she hissed to David, but her words died as she watched what happened next. The man walked calmly into the arena, ignoring Wilson's frantic gestures to retreat. He didn't carry a whip or a pole. He simply stopped about 20 feet from the raging stallion and stood perfectly still. Thunderbolt, in mid-charge toward one of the assistants, suddenly checked his stride. His head swiveled toward the newcomer, nostrils flaring. The arena fell silent. The maintenance man didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stood, shoulders relaxed, gaze steady. Thunderbolt snorted, pawing the ground. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. Then, impossibly, the stallion lowered his head slightly. He was still alert, still ready to explode, but something had changed. "Who the hell is that?" Victor whispered. "James Miller," David answered, quickly pulling up personnel files on his tablet. "Maintenance and facility engineering. Been with us about 18 months. Morgan watched, transfixed, as James slowly raised his hand, palm down, not reaching toward the horse, but simply holding it steady in the air. Thunderbolt's ears flickered forward, then back, then forward again. A sign of curiosity battling fear. For 10 breathless seconds, predator and prey engaged in silent communication. Then James lowered his hand and took a single step backward. Thunderbolt remained in place, watching him. The spell broke when Wilson barked an order to his assistants, sending them forward with the control poles again. Thunderbolt immediately tensed. The moment of calm shattered. James turned and walked away as security personnel finally entered the arena to escort him out. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morgan's voice cut through the chaos, her public relations instincts kicking in. "We apologize for this unexpected interruption. Perhaps we should move to the conference room for refreshments while our team secures the situation." As the investors filed out, murmuring among themselves, Morgan caught Victor's cold stare. "Fix this," he mouthed silently. The maintenance worker had just publicly humiliated her star trainer and endangered a multi-million-dollar investment. By all rights, she should be drafting his termination papers. Instead, she found herself saying, "Find James Miller. Bring him to my office, now." James stood in Morgan's office, seemingly unimpressed by the floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Kentucky countryside. He had the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors, sun lines around his eyes, calloused hands hanging loosely at his sides. At 42, his dark hair was peppered with gray at the temples, and a faint scar ran along his jawline. "You violated at least 6 safety protocols by entering that arena," Morgan began, her voice cool and measured. "Not to mention disrupting a demonstration for our most important investors. I should fire you on the spot." James met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am." His calm acceptance caught her off guard. "No excuses, no apologies." "Then why did you do it?" she demanded. "The horse was about to seriously hurt someone. And you thought you could prevent that. How exactly?" James shifted his weight slightly, by giving him a choice other than fight or flight. Morgan leaned back in her chair, studying him. There was something in his demeanor that didn't fit the profile of a typical maintenance worker. A quiet confidence that bordered on authority. "Our personnel file says you were in the military before joining Elmwood." "Yes, ma'am, 12 years. "Doing what exactly?" "Various things." Morgan drummed her fingers on the desk. "Mr. Miller, I don't have time for cryptic answers. What gives a maintenance engineer the confidence to walk into an arena with a dangerous animal that has injured Olympic-level trainers?" James was silent for a moment. "Experience." Before Morgan could press further, the door opened and Dr. Wilson strode in, his face flushed with anger. "What is he doing here? This man endangered everyone in that arena with his reckless behavior." "I was just getting to that, Richard," Morgan replied coolly. "Mr. Miller was explaining his actions. Wilson jabbed a finger toward James. There's nothing to explain. He's not certified, not trained, and has no business interfering with specialized equine behavior modification. We have protocols, scientific methods. That we're failing spectacularly, Morgan cut in. Or did you miss the part where Thunderbolt nearly took your head off? Wilson's mouth tightened into a thin line. A temporary setback. My techniques require consistent application over time. Time is something we don't have, Morgan replied. The board wants results, not excuses. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. James stood quietly, seemingly content to let the two professionals argue around him. Morgan found his calm presence strangely irritating. Mr. Miller, she said abruptly, what exactly did you do in there? How did you get Thunderbolt to stop? I didn't do anything to him, James replied. I just let him see me. Let him know I wasn't a threat. Wilson scoffed. Pseudo-scientific nonsense. Horses don't see people that way. They respond to clear boundaries and consistent reinforcement. James shrugged. If you say so. Morgan felt a headache building behind her eyes. The dismissal was clear in James's tone, and Wilson was practically vibrating with indignation. She needed to regain control of the situation. Mr. Miller, since you seem to have such insight into Thunderbolt's behavior, let me make you a proposition. She leaned forward, fixing him with her most penetrating stare. 30 days. You have 30 days to make progress with that horse. Real, demonstrable progress. The autumn showcase is in 1 month. If you can ride Thunderbolt in that ring without getting yourself killed, I'll provide full resources for any project you want to pursue, plus a position as senior advisor on our training staff. Wilson's jaw dropped. Morgan, you can't be serious. This man is a janitor. Maintenance engineer, James corrected mildly. Whatever, Wilson sputtered. He has no credentials, no understanding of our methodology. Our methodology just failed in front of 24 potential investors, Morgan snapped. At this point, I'm open to alternatives. She turned back to James. Well, do you accept? James studied her for a long moment. On one condition. Morgan raised an eyebrow. You're hardly in a position to make demands. No cameras, no observation, no interference. Just me and the horse. Absolutely not, Wilson interjected. That violates every safety protocol. Done, Morgan said, cutting him off. But you'll sign a comprehensive liability waiver. If that horse kills you, it's not on Elmwood. James nodded once. Fair enough. This is insanity, Wilson muttered. The board will never approve. Leave the board to me, Morgan replied. She extended her hand to James. Do we have a deal, Mr. Miller? James hesitated, then shook her hand, his grip firm and calloused. We have a deal. As Wilson stormed out and James turned to leave, Morgan called after him. One more thing, Mr. Miller. What makes you think you can succeed where professionals have failed? James paused at the door. Sometimes the strongest things don't need to be broken. They just need to be heard. The simplicity of his answer lingered in the air long after he'd gone. The sun was setting by the time James pulled his old pickup truck into the gravel driveway of the small farmhouse he rented on the outskirts of Elmwood's property. The modest 2-bedroom home sat on 3 acres of land, part of the compensation package that had drawn him to the job 18 months ago. Light spilled from the kitchen window, and he could see Mrs. Larson, the elderly neighbor who watched Lily after school, moving about inside. A familiar sense of guilt tugged at him. Another day of coming home too late, of leaving his daughter in someone else's care. He sat in the truck for a moment, replaying the day's events. The stallion's terrified rage, the arrogant trainer with his gadgets and theories, the cold-eyed CEO with her challenge. What the hell had he been thinking? The front door opened, and Mrs. Larson appeared, waving at him to come inside. With a sigh, James grabbed his lunch pail and work jacket and headed in. There he is, Mrs. Larson said warmly as he entered. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen their share of heartache. Lily's been working on her homework. We had chicken and vegetables for dinner. Thank you, Mrs. Larson. I'm sorry I'm late again. She waved away his apology. Don't you worry. That girl is a joy to be around. She lowered her voice. Still not talking much, but she did ask me to help her with a drawing. James nodded, the familiar ache in his chest. How much do I owe you for this week? We'll settle up on Friday like always. She patted his arm. You get some rest. You look like you've had quite a day. After Mrs. Larson left, James moved quietly through the house to the small bedroom at the back. The door was partially open, and he could see Lily sitting cross-legged on her bed, bent over a sketch pad. At 10, she was all elbows and knees, her dark hair falling in a curtain around her face. So much like her mother, it sometimes hurt to look at her. He knocked softly on the doorframe. Lily looked up, her solemn eyes brightening a little at the sight of him. Hey, kiddo. Sorry I'm late. Lily shrugged, then held up her sketch pad. It was a drawing of a horse, not Thunderbolt, but the Palomino mare from the children's program at Elmwood. James had taken her to see the gentle therapy horses a few times, trying to rekindle her interest. Before everything happened, she'd been horse crazy, begging for riding lessons every birthday. That's really good, he said, sitting on the edge of her bed. You've got her mane just right. Lily smiled faintly, then turned to a fresh page and wrote in careful letters, Did you fix the broken sprinkler today? This was how they communicated now. Short notes and nods and gestures. The doctors called it selective mutism, triggered by trauma. For 3 years since the accident, Lily had spoken only a handful of words, and only to him. Not today, James replied. I got a little sidetracked. Actually, I've got some news. He hesitated, wondering how to explain. I'm going to be working with a different horse for a while. A special project. Lily looked up, curious. His name is Thunderbolt. He's having a hard time. People haven't been very good to him, and now he's scared and angry. I'm going to try to help him. Lily wrote, Can I see him? James shook his head. Not yet, honey. He's not safe right now. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. But maybe someday, if things go well. She nodded, then yawned widely. Time for bed. School tomorrow. He kissed the top of her head. I love you, Lily Pad. She hugged him tightly, her way of saying she loved him too. As he turned out her light, she was already curling up with the stuffed horse that had been her constant companion since the accident. James moved through the quiet house to the garage outside. Inside, illuminated by a single overhead light, sat the 1967 Mustang Fastback, Sarah's dream car. They'd found it in a junkyard 3 weeks before the accident, and she'd been so excited about restoring it together. Now it served as both memorial and therapy. Every spare dollar, every free hour went into bringing the car back to life. It was a promise he'd made to himself, to Sarah, to finish what they'd started. He took a deep breath, then opened the hood. The engine was nearly complete, a 390 cubic inch V8 that he'd rebuilt piece by piece. He ran his hand over the valve cover, the metal cool and smooth beneath his fingers. Got myself into something, Sarah, he said quietly to the empty garage. Not sure if it's a good idea. Talking to her like this had become a habit, a way to process his thoughts. Sometimes he imagined what she'd say back, usually something encouraging with a touch of shy. Sarah had never been one to back down from a challenge. He picked up a wrench and began working on the carburetor. The familiar rhythm of mechanical work soothed him, allowed his mind to wander back to the stallion. Thunderbolt reminded him of some of the men he'd served with, the ones who'd seen too much, who carried invisible wounds that made them lash out at the world. Breaking them further never worked. They needed someone to see past the rage to the pain underneath. After an hour of work, James closed the hood and reached for a weathered leather journal on the workbench. It was bound with a simple strap, the pages yellowed with age. Opening it carefully, he flipped through the handwritten notes and diagrams, generations of Miller family wisdom on handling troubled horses and other animals. His grandfather had started it, his father had added to it, and then James himself had continued the tradition. The Miller method, his father had called it proudly. Not that James had ever used that name outside the family. The techniques were simple but required patience, something the modern training world, with its emphasis on quick results and technological shortcuts, had little time for. He ran his finger down a page titled Fear Responses, his father's neat handwriting detailing how to recognize and address different types of equine anxiety. James had adapted many of these techniques during his military career, working with service animals in high-stress environments. The principles were the same, whether the animal wore horseshoes or a military vest. Guess we'll see if the old ways still work, he murmured, closing the journal. He finished his drink, turned out the light, and headed back to the house, his mind already mapping out tomorrow's approach to the stallion. Morgan Reynolds did not believe in leaving things to chance. After James Miller left her office, she immediately called for a comprehensive background check. Then she summoned her IT director to her office. "I need you to install a hidden security camera in Thunderbolt's stall area," she said without preamble. The IT director shifted uncomfortably. "But you just promised Miller." "I'm aware of what I promised," Morgan cut him off. "This is a $5 million investment at stake. I'm not leaving it in the hands of a maintenance worker without monitoring the situation." "Yes, ma'am, we can use the new micro cameras. They're practically invisible. Do it tonight, and this stays between us, understood?" After he left, Morgan stared out the window at the darkening Kentucky landscape. The rolling hills and white fences looked like something from a postcard, perfectly manicured, perfectly controlled. Just the way she liked her world. She'd built Elmwood from the ground up, turning her inheritance into something uniquely hers. Her father had been an old-school horseman who believed in whispers and mystical connections with animals. Morgan had rebelled against his methods, embracing technology and measurable results. Elmwood was the culmination of that philosophy. Horses understood through data, not intuition. And yet today, she'd witnessed something she couldn't quite explain. The way Thunderbolt had responded to Miller's presence didn't fit into her analytical framework. It made her deeply uncomfortable. Her phone buzzed with a text from Victor. "Board wants update on Thunderbolt's situation. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Morgan sighed. Victor Shaw had been gunning for her position for years, using his majority stakeholder status to apply constant pressure. The Thunderbolt situation was exactly the kind of leverage he loved, a clear, quantifiable failure he could use to undermine her leadership. She picked up the preliminary personnel report on James Miller. Military service was confirmed. U.S. Army, 12 years, honorably discharged with the rank of Staff Sergeant. Before Elmwood, he'd worked at various maintenance and mechanical jobs across 3 states. Nothing in his employment history suggested experience with horses, let alone the kind of specialized knowledge needed to handle a case like Thunderbolt. Or at least, that's what the initial report showed. Morgan frowned, instructing her assistant to dig deeper. There was something about Miller that didn't add up. Her computer chimed with an alert. The security camera was online. She opened the feed to see Thunderbolt's stall, illuminated by the dim night lighting. The stallion was pacing restlessly, his powerful body moving back and forth in the confined space like a caged predator. Morgan watched for a while, then closed the laptop. Tomorrow would bring answers. Either Miller had some hidden expertise, or he'd be another casualty of Thunderbolt's rage. Either way, she'd have data. And data was something she understood. For the next 5 days, James followed the same routine. He arrived early at Thunderbolt's isolation wing, sat near the stall on a simple wooden stool, and simply existed in the horse's space. Sometimes he read from a well-worn paperback. Sometimes he brought small mechanical projects to work on. Always calm, always predictable, never pushing. By the 5th day, the stallion's initial agitation had decreased noticeably. He no longer charged the stall door when James appeared, instead watching him with cautious interest from a safe distance. On the morning of the 6th day, James arrived carrying an old transistor radio along with his usual book. He set the radio on a small table near Thunderbolt's stall and began working on it, carefully removing the back panel and examining the components inside. Frank Thompson, the weathered stable hand who'd been at Elmwood for decades, stopped by mid-morning. "Still at it, I see," Frank observed, leaning against the opposite wall. "What's with the radio?" "Broken," James replied simply. "Figured I'd fix it." Frank watched as James carefully soldered a connection inside the radio. "You're good with your hands, mechanical things." "Keeps me busy." "And the horse, he don't mind the tinkering?" James glanced up at Thunderbolt, who was watching the proceedings with alert interest. "I think he's curious." Frank chuckled. "Wouldn't surprise me. That one's smarter than most people give him credit for." He lowered his voice. "Word around the stable is Dr. Wilson's furious about your arrangement. Been telling anyone who'll listen that you're wasting time." "Time's only wasted if nothing's happening," James replied, making a final adjustment to the radio. He closed the panel and turned the dial. Soft classical music filled the quiet space. Thunderbolt's ears pricked forward at the sound. He took a step closer to the stall door, then another, drawn by the unfamiliar melody. "Well, I'll be damned," Frank murmured. "He likes Mozart." James smiled slightly. "Seems so." "You know," Frank said thoughtfully, "I've been here since Mrs. Reynolds' father ran this place. Old man Reynolds, he used to play music in the stables too. Said it calmed the horses' minds." He shook his head. "Course, when Morgan took over, all that went out the window. Too unscientific for her taste." James continued working quietly, adjusting the volume on the radio. What was he like, her father? Samuel Reynolds, salt of the earth, understood horses better than most understand people. Had this way about him, could walk into a stall with the meanest stallion and walk out without a scratch. Frank's expression grew distant with memory. Morgan was different from the start, always with her charts and books, wanted to measure everything, analyze everything. Samuel used to say she was trying to reduce magic to mathematics. And now she runs the place. Frank nodded. After Samuel died, she transformed it, brought in all the technology, the sensors, the data systems. Can't argue with the results. Elmwood's the most profitable training center in 3 states. But sometimes, he trailed off. Sometimes what? Sometimes I wonder if we've lost something in the process. The connection. Frank pushed himself off the wall. Anyway, I had best get back to work before the cameras catch me gossiping. After Frank left, James settled back on his stool, letting the music fill the space between him and the stallion. Thunderbolt had moved to the front of his stall, his attention divided between James and the source of the music. For the next hour, they existed together in this peaceful state. Man, horse, and Mozart. It was the calmest James had seen Thunderbolt since beginning their sessions. The peace was shattered when Morgan Reynolds appeared, her heels clicking sharply on the concrete floor. She stopped abruptly at the sight of the radio. "What's this?" she asked him, gesturing to the device. "A radio," James replied, not looking up from his book. "I can see that, Mr. Miller. Why is it here?" "Music helps calm the nervous system, creates a positive association with human presence." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "That's not in our protocol." "No, ma'am, it's in mine." She studied Thunderbolt, who had retreated slightly at her arrival but remained near the front of the stall. "And you believe this is making a difference?" "Look at him yourself. 5 days ago, he would have been trying to kick down that door at the sound of your voice. Now he's curious." Morgan stepped closer to the stall, and Thunderbolt tensed, ears flattening slightly. She stopped, observing the stallion's reaction. "He's still afraid. Trust takes time." "Time is a luxury we don't have, Mr. Miller. Victor Shaw is pushing for immediate action with Thunderbolt. He wants results, not ambiance." She gestured dismissively at the radio. James set his book aside and stood, facing Morgan directly. "What did you expect? That I'd wave a magic wand and fix in a week what your team couldn't fix in months? This horse has been traumatized. Healing doesn't happen overnight." "I expected a methodology I could quantify," Morgan replied coolly. "So far, all I've seen is a man sitting on a stool playing music. Sometimes the strongest things don't need to be broken. They just need to be heard," James repeated, his voice quiet but firm. "You asked me to help this horse. Let me do it my way." They faced each other, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Morgan turned to leave. "You have until the end of next week to show tangible progress, Mr. Miller. After that, I can't hold the board off any longer." As her footsteps faded, James returned to his stool, picking up his book again. But his mind was elsewhere, calculating the weight of the challenge he'd accepted. He glanced up at Thunderbolt, who stood watching him with wary intensity. "Just you and me now," he said softly. "And we both got something to prove, don't we?" That evening, when James returned home, he found Lily waiting eagerly by the window. As soon as he walked through the door, she thrust a drawing into his hands. It was a sketch of Thunderbolt, remarkably accurate despite the fact she'd never seen him. "This is amazing, Lily Pad. How did you know what he looks like?" She wrote on her pad, "Mrs. Larson showed me pictures of the horses at your work on the computer." James smiled, running his hand over her hair. "You've got his spirit just right. He's a beautiful animal, just scared and angry." Lily wrote, "Like me after Mom died?" The question caught him off guard. They rarely spoke directly about Sarah or the accident. "Yeah, honey, something like that." She considered this, then wrote, "Can I help you with him?" James hesitated. "He's not safe yet, Lily, but maybe someday soon." The next morning, James arrived at Elmwood earlier than usual, carrying a duffel bag along with his usual supplies. He found Frank already at work in the barn aisle. "Morning," Frank greeted him. "You're early today." "Big day," James replied, setting down his bags. Frank raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what's the plan?" Taking the next step, James unzipped the duffel, revealing an old leather saddle pad. "Time to introduce some equipment." "Bold move," Frank commented. "You sure he's ready?" James nodded. "Not for riding, but ready to start building positive associations with tack." He set up the radio first, letting the now familiar classical music fill the space. Thunderbolt, recognizing the routine, came to the front of his stall, ears forward in greeting. "Morning, big guy," James said softly. "Got something new for you to think about today." He hung the saddle pad on a hook outside the stall, clearly visible to Thunderbolt. The stallion eyed it suspiciously, nostrils flaring as he caught its scent. For the next hour, James simply sat in his usual spot, reading while Thunderbolt assessed the new addition to his environment. Gradually, the horse's tension eased, his curiosity overtaking his initial wariness. Around mid-morning, the door to the isolation wing opened, and Dr. Wilson strode in, accompanied by Victor Shaw. Both men stopped short at the sight of James calmly reading while classical music played. "This is what $5 million gets us?" Victor asked incredulously. "A man reading a book while playing Mozart?" James didn't look up. "Good morning, gentlemen." Wilson gestured angrily toward the radio. "This is completely unsanctioned. None of this follows established protocols." "That was the agreement," James replied mildly. "My methods, my timeline." Victor stepped closer, his expensive Italian shoes clicking on the concrete. In his 60s, with silver hair and the lean build of a lifelong rider, he exuded old money confidence. "Mr. Miller, is it? I'm Victor Shaw, chairman of the board. Perhaps Morgan didn't make the urgency of this situation clear enough. We have investors expecting results, not whatever this is." James finally looked up from his book. "Mr. Shaw, with all due respect, rushing this process will only set us back. Thunderbolt needs time to learn trust." Victor scoffed. "Trust? This isn't a therapy session. This is a business. That horse represents a significant investment that's currently generating zero return." He turned to Wilson. "Richard, I want a full assessment of alternative options on my desk by tomorrow, including the breeding-only scenario we discussed." Wilson nodded eagerly. "Already working on it, sir. I have several facilities lined up that might take him, though at a significant loss given his behavioral issues." James stood, facing both men. "You're making a mistake. This horse has potential. He just needs the right approach." "And your approach is what exactly?" Victor asked with thinly veiled contempt. "Serenading him with classical music? Reading him bedtime stories? My approach is treating him like a living being, not a machine that needs reprogramming." James's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath the surface. "In my experience, force only creates resistance. Patience creates partnership." Victor's eyes narrowed. "And what experience would that be, maintenance man? Morgan may be taken in by your cowboy mystique, but ideal in facts. Your employee file shows no equine training credentials whatsoever." Before James could respond, Morgan herself appeared in the doorway. "Victor, Richard, I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled." Victor turned. "Just checking on our $5 million experiment, which appears to be exactly as unimpressive as I expected." Morgan's gaze swept the scene, the radio playing softly, the saddle pad hanging on the hook, Thunderbolt standing alertly at the front of his stall. "I see progress," she said simply. "Progress?" Victor echoed incredulously. "The showcase is 3 weeks away. At this rate, we'll be presenting our investors with a horse that can appreciate Mozart but can't be ridden." Morgan stepped further into the space. "I granted Mr. Miller 30 days. It's been less than a week. We agreed to let him work without interference. And we're hemorrhaging money every day this drags on," Victor countered. "The board expects leadership, Morgan, not indulgence of amateur theories." "The board elected me CEO for a reason," Morgan replied coolly. "If you'd like to challenge that decision, you are welcome to call a vote. Until then, my agreement with Mr. Miller stands. The tension in the air was palpable. Victor's face tightened with barely controlled anger. This isn't over, he said quietly. Richard, come with me. We have matters to discuss. After they departed, Morgan turned to James. You've made an enemy. Wasn't trying to make friends. She studied Thunderbolt, who had remained surprisingly calm throughout the confrontation. Is that a saddle pad? James nodded. Next step in the process, getting him used to the idea of tack without the pressure of actually wearing it. And the music? Creates a calm environment, drowns out disruptive noises, gives him something consistent to associate with our sessions. Morgan listened to the gentle strains of the symphony. My father used to play music in the stables, she said almost to herself. So I heard. She glanced at him sharply. From whom? Frank. He speaks highly of your father. Morgan's expression closed again, the momentary vulnerability gone. Frank talks too much. She turned to leave, then paused. Victor won't give up easily. He's wanted to replace me for years, and he sees Thunderbolt as his opportunity. Why? Because I championed the purchase against his recommendation. $5 million was more than we'd ever spent on a single horse. He said it was reckless. Her mouth tightened. If Thunderbolt fails, it validates his position that I'm too emotionally invested to lead effectively. James considered this new information. So this isn't just about the horse. It's never just about the horse, Mr. Miller. It's about power. Remember that. With those words, she left, her heels clicking a sharp rhythm down the concrete aisle. James returned to his stool, thoughtful. The stakes had just been raised considerably. This wasn't simply about saving a traumatized animal. It was about corporate politics, power struggles, and Morgan Reynolds' position as CEO. He looked at Thunderbolt, who was watching him with intelligent eyes. Didn't sign up for all this, did we, big guy? He murmured. But here we are. The rest of the day passed quietly. James gradually moved the saddle pad closer to Thunderbolt's stall, gauging the horse's reaction. By late afternoon, it was hanging directly on the stall door, and Thunderbolt was calmly sniffing it, showing no signs of fear. A small victory, but significant. The foundation of trust was growing. As James packed up to leave for the day, Frank appeared again, his expression troubled. Heard about the visit from the brass, he said, leaning on his broom. Victor Shaw's not one to back down. Neither am I, James replied, zipping his duffel. Frank glanced around, ensuring they were alone. Listen, there's something you should know. That horse, Thunderbolt, he didn't come to us the way they said he did. James paused. What do you mean? The official story is he was purchased from a prestigious breeding farm in Europe. Clean record, just naturally difficult. But I was here when he arrived. Frank's voice dropped lower. He had welts and scars that weren't in any of the documentation. And he was drugged to the gills, could barely stand. Why are you telling me this now? Frank's weathered face was grim. Because I overheard Victor and Wilson talking after they left you. They're not planning to wait for your 30 days to be up. They're making moves to discredit you and push through the breeding-only option. James absorbed this information, his jaw tightening. Thanks for the warning. There's more. Frank hesitated. They were asking questions about your background, digging into your military record. A cold feeling settled in James's stomach. He'd been careful to keep his full military history vague in his employment application. The last thing he needed was for his specialized training work with the Army's K-9 units to become common knowledge. Or worse, for the details of Sarah's accident to resurface. Appreciate the heads up, he said quietly. You're doing right by that horse, Frank said. Just watch your back. Elmwood looks pretty from the outside, but there are snakes in the garden. After Frank left, James stood for a moment in the quiet stable, considering his next move. The game had changed. He would need to accelerate Thunderbolt's training without sacrificing the trust they'd begun to build. And he would need to be prepared for whatever Victor and Wilson were planning. That night, after Lily was asleep, James pulled out his old military footlocker from the back of his closet. He hadn't opened it since moving to Kentucky. Inside, beneath layers of carefully folded uniforms, lay a folder marked Classified, U.S. Army Special Operations K-9 Unit. James had spent 8 of his 12 military years working with specialized service animals, dogs primarily, but also horses used in certain operations. His training methods, a combination of family wisdom and military precision, had earned him a reputation as the man who could rehabilitate even the most traumatized animals. The irony wasn't lost on him. He could heal wounded animals, but he couldn't heal his own daughter's silent trauma, or his own, for that matter. He closed the folder without opening it. The past was the past, but if Victor Shaw wanted to dig into his history, he might find more than he bargained for. The next morning dawned gray and threatening rain. James arrived at Elmwood to find an unexpected visitor waiting by Thunderbolt's stall. Morgan Reynolds, dressed not in her usual business attire, but in riding clothes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Ms. Reynolds," he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "Mr. Miller?" She gestured to a thick folder she was holding. "I received some interesting information this morning about your background." James set down his bags. "Is that so?" Staff Sergeant James Miller, U.S. Army Special Operations K-9 Unit, specialized in rehabilitating service animals with combat trauma. She looked up from the file. "You neglected to mention this particular expertise in your employment application. Wasn't relevant to maintaining sprinkler systems," he replied evenly. "It's extremely relevant to what you're doing now." She closed the folder. "Why hide it?" James began his morning routine, setting up the radio and checking on Thunderbolt, who watched them both with interest. "When I left the Army, I left that life behind. Had my reasons." "Your wife," Morgan said quietly. "Sarah Miller, accomplished equestrian, killed 3 years ago in a riding accident during a competition. Your daughter witnessed it." James froze, his back to her. The clinical recitation of his personal tragedy hit like a physical blow. "You've been thorough. I like to know who I'm dealing with." Morgan stepped closer. "Why keep this from me? Your experience with traumatized animals is exactly what Thunderbolt needs." James turned to face her. "Because I didn't want this. I took this job because it was quiet, straightforward work. No pressure, no expectations. Just me and machines that could be fixed with the right tools." His voice hardened. "I didn't want to be responsible for another broken spirit." Understanding dawned in Morgan's eyes. "You blame yourself for your wife's accident. I was supposed to check her equipment that morning, standard safety procedure before every competition, but I got called away for an emergency with one of my K9s, asked her to do it herself." The memory was still razor sharp. The bridle broke during her ride, snapped clean through at full gallop. Morgan was silent for a moment. "And your daughter hasn't spoken since?" "Barely a word. The doctors call it selective mutism, triggered by trauma." James ran a hand through his hair. "So now you know why I'm not eager to advertise my history with horses, or why I wasn't planning to get involved with Thunderbolt until that day in the arena." "What changed?" Morgan asked. "Why step in then?" James looked at Thunderbolt, who was watching their exchange with alert interest. "Because I recognized something in him. The same thing I see in Lily's eyes sometimes. Not just fear, betrayal, the sense that the world isn't safe anymore." He met Morgan's gaze directly. "I couldn't walk away from that. Not again." Morgan absorbed this information, her professional demeanor momentarily stripped away. For the first time, James saw past the CEO to the woman beneath, someone struggling with her own burdens, her own past. "I'll keep your history confidential," she said finally. "But I want full transparency from now on. No more secrets." James nodded his agreement. As Morgan turned to leave, Thunderbolt suddenly whinnied, a soft, questioning sound directed at her. She stopped, startled. "He's never done that before," she said, turning back. "He's starting to trust, to show interest." James gestured toward the stallion. "He's not just a data point, Ms. Reynolds. He's trying to connect." Morgan approached the stall cautiously. Thunderbolt watched her, ears forward, no longer pinned back in fear and aggression. She stopped a few feet away, respecting his space. "My father would have loved him," she said softly, "seen the spirit in him." "And you?" James asked. "What do you see?" Morgan met his gaze. "I see $5 million in a corporate power struggle." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "But I'm starting to see something else too, something my father might have called the soul of a horse." She left then, leaving James with a new understanding of the complex woman behind Elmwood's empire, and a sense that in Thunderbolt's journey, there might be healing for more than just the horse. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting golden shafts of light across the isolation wing. 2 weeks had passed since James first accepted Morgan's challenge, and a subtle but significant shift had occurred in the atmosphere surrounding Thunderbolt's stall. The frantic energy of fear had been replaced by something quieter, a cautious curiosity. James arrived earlier than usual, carrying not only his regular tools but also a small duffel bag containing items from his military days. After Morgan had discovered his background with the K9 unit, he decided to incorporate some of his specialized techniques. If Victor Shaw was pushing for results, James would accelerate the process, but on his terms, not at the expense of Thunderbolt's trust. He set up the radio first, filling the space with the gentle strains of Bach's cello suites. Thunderbolt, now accustomed to the morning routine, approached the front of his stall, ears forward in greeting. "Morning, big guy," James said softly. "Got some new things to try today." From his duffel, he removed a clicker training device, a simple tool he'd used extensively with trauma-affected military dogs. He also brought out a small pouch of apple slices, Thunderbolt's favorite treat according to the feeding records Frank had shared with him. Frank himself appeared a few minutes later, nodding in approval at the new equipment. "Stepping things up, I see. Time to make some measurable progress," James replied. "Shaw's been pressuring Morgan daily." Frank leaned on his broom, watching as James arranged his tools. "You know, it's strange seeing someone work with horses the old way again. Reminds me of Samuel Reynolds. He used to say a good horseman listens more than he speaks." "Sound advice for dealing with people too," James commented, checking the stall door's mechanism. Today, if all went well, he planned to enter Thunderbolt's space for the first time. "I've been meaning to ask," Frank said, lowering his voice. "What happened that made you leave it all behind? Word around the stable is you were some kind of animal whisperer for the military." James's hands stilled for a moment. "Lost someone. Made it hard to stay in that world." Frank nodded, understanding in his weathered face. "Loss has a way of changing a man's path." "That it does." James straightened up. "Mind giving us some space today? What I'm planning requires focus." "Say no more." Frank touched his cap in a casual salute. "I'll keep the curious onlookers at bay." After Frank departed, James settled on his stool, letting Thunderbolt become accustomed to the new items he'd brought. He began by simply holding the clicker, allowing the horse to see it. "This is going to help us communicate," he explained in a calm, steady voice. "Clear signals, consistent rewards. No confusion, no surprises." It was the same approach he'd used with combat-traumatized dogs, creating absolute clarity and predictability to rebuild a sense of safety. The difference was in scale and power. A frightened German shepherd could do damage. A frightened 17-hand stallion could kill. James clicked the device once. Thunderbolt's ears swiveled toward the sound, alert but not alarmed. James immediately offered an apple slice through the bars, which the horse cautiously accepted. He repeated this simple action, click, reward, for 20 minutes, creating the association. Each time, Thunderbolt's response came more quickly, more confidently. "Good," James murmured. "You're getting it." Next came the more challenging step. James stood and approached the stall door, clicker in hand. Thunderbolt tensed slightly, but remained at the front of the stall, curiosity overriding caution. "I'm coming in now," James said, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. "Just going to stand inside. Nothing more than that." He unlatched the door carefully, maintaining eye contact with the stallion. Thunderbolt snorted once but didn't retreat. James stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and simply stood still, making himself as non-threatening as possible. The stallion's nostrils flared, taking in James's scent. His powerful body was coiled with potential energy, ready to explode if threatened. James remained perfectly still, breathing slowly, projecting calm. "Fear and trust can't exist in the same space," he said quietly. "When you build one, you eliminate the other, and I choose to build trust." For 5 long minutes, they stood in silent assessment of each other. Then, millimeter by millimeter, Thunderbolt relaxed. His breathing steadied, his muscles loosened. James clicked the device and offered another apple slice, which the horse took more confidently than before. James spent the next hour in the stall, gradually moving around the space, always telegraphing his intentions, always rewarding calm acceptance with clicks and treats. By the end of the session, he was able to walk a complete circuit of the stall, while Thunderbolt watched with alert interest rather than terror. It was a monumental step forward, though to an outside observer, it might have seemed unremarkable. No dramatic breakthroughs, no Hollywood moments, just the quiet building of trust between two beings. As James prepared to leave the stall, the door to the isolation wing opened. He expected Morgan or perhaps Frank, but instead Lily appeared, clutching her sketchbook. Mrs. Larson hovered anxiously behind her. "I'm so sorry, James," the older woman called. "It's a school holiday. She was absolutely insistent on coming to see you." James quickly stepped out of the stall, securing it behind him. "It's all right, Mrs. Larson." He knelt to Lily's level. "Hey, kiddo, this is a surprise?" Lily's eyes were fixed on Thunderbolt, wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. The stallion, for his part, was equally interested in the small visitor, his ears pricked forward curiously. James glanced between his daughter and the horse, recognizing something in their mutual assessment of each other. Both traumatized, both wary of the world, both seeking connection despite their fear. "Would you like to draw him?" James asked Lily. "From over here where it's safe?" Lily nodded eagerly. James set up a small folding chair for her at a safe distance from the stall. Mrs. Larson settled on a nearby bench with her knitting. "I'll just be right here," James assured his daughter, returning to his work with Thunderbolt. For the next hour, Lily sketched intently while James continued his careful conditioning work. The stallion seemed unusually calm despite the new presence, occasionally glancing toward Lily with what almost looked like curiosity. Around noon, Morgan arrived, stopping short at the sight of the little girl intently drawing. "I wasn't aware we were hosting visitors today," she said, though her tone held more surprise than disapproval. "My daughter, Lily," James explained. "School holiday." Morgan approached carefully, glancing at Lily's drawing. "That's quite good," she remarked, genuine admiration in her voice. "You've captured his spirit." Lily looked up, studying Morgan with solemn eyes, then returned to her drawing without acknowledgement. "She doesn't speak," James explained quietly. "Not since the accident." Understanding flickered across Morgan's face. "I see." She turned her attention to Thunderbolt. "You've been in the stall with him?" "Yes, major progress today. He's accepting human presence without fear." Morgan's eyebrows rose. "That's significant." She studied the setup, the clicker, the treats, the systematic approach. "Military techniques?" James nodded. "Adapted for equine psychology. Clear communication, consistent rewards, predictable interactions." "And it's working," Morgan observed, noting Thunderbolt's relaxed demeanor. "It's a start. We've got a long way to go before he's writable." Morgan checked her watch. "The board meets tomorrow. Victor's been lobbying aggressively for his breeding-only option. I need something concrete to show them." James considered this. "Bring them here. Let them see for themselves." "You demonstrate in front of the board?" "If it keeps Thunderbolt safe, yes." Morgan studied him, a new respect in her eyes. 2 o'clock tomorrow, then?" She glanced again at Lily, who was still absorbed in her drawing. "Your daughter has talent." After Morgan left, James continued working with Thunderbolt, gradually introducing a soft brush, teaching the horse to accept gentle grooming. By mid-afternoon, he was able to brush the stallion's neck and shoulders, areas that would typically be covered by tack. As the day wound down, Lily approached James, holding out her completed drawing. It showed Thunderbolt not as he was now, but as he could be, proud, strong, and unafraid, with James standing calmly beside him. The detail was remarkable for a 10-year-old, capturing both the power of the animal and the quiet strength of the man. "This is beautiful, Lily Pad," James said, his throat tightening with emotion. "Can I show it to him?" Lily nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. James held the drawing up where Thunderbolt could see it. The stallion stretched his neck forward, nostrils flaring as he examined the paper. For a moment, horse and child regarded each other across the barrier of the stall door, two wounded souls recognizing something in each other. Then, in a voice so soft it was barely audible, Lily whispered, "He's like me." James froze, stunned by the sound of his daughter's voice. It was the first time she had spoken to anyone other than him since the accident. Mrs. Larson looked up from her knitting, eyes wide with surprise. Yes, James managed, kneeling beside her hippo. He is. He's scared, but he's learning to be brave again. Lily reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, wrinkled apple she'd saved from her lunch. Can I give it to him? James hesitated, weighing the risk against the potential breakthrough this represented. From my hand, he decided. You can place it on my palm, and I'll offer it to him. Carefully, Lily placed the apple on James's outstretched hand. He approached the stall door, holding his palm flat. Thunderbolt stretched his neck, gently taking the offering with velvety lips. He's gentle, Lily whispered, wonder in her voice. He's learning to be, James corrected softly. Just like we all are. The drive home that evening was filled with a quiet, hopeful energy. Lily didn't speak again, but something had shifted. A door that had been firmly closed for 3 years had cracked open, just enough to let in a sliver of light. James couldn't help but think about the parallels. His daughter finding her voice, Thunderbolt finding his courage, both healing through this unexpected connection. And perhaps, though he was less willing to admit it, something healing in himself as well. The next day dawned gray and threatening rain, matching James's mood as he prepared for the board meeting. He arrived at Elmwood early, wanting extra time to work with Thunderbolt before the demonstration. Frank met him at the entrance, his weathered face creased with concern. Heard about the board meeting. Shaw's been here since dawn, talking with Wilson. Don't like the feel of it. Thanks for the heads up. James continued toward the isolation wing, Frank falling into step beside him. There's something else, the older man added, his voice lowered. New stable hands started yesterday afternoon, right after you left. Young fella, keeps asking questions about Thunderbolt's schedule when people are around. James frowned. What's his name? Tyler something. Said he was transferred from the West facility, but I've never seen him before. Keep an eye on him, James advised, and let me know if he comes anywhere near Thunderbolt's stall. The morning session with Thunderbolt went well. The stallion remembered the previous day's lessons, accepting James's presence in the stall without fear. James introduced a soft rope, letting Thunderbolt get used to the feel of it against his neck and withers. By noon, the horse was allowing James to place a light saddle pad on his back for brief periods. Small steps, carefully managed, building on each success. James took a short break to eat the sandwich he'd brought, sitting outside Thunderbolt's stall. The stallion watched him with interest, occasionally nickering softly, a sound James had never heard from him before today. As 1 o'clock approached, James sensed rather than heard someone enter the isolation wing. He turned to see a young man he did not recognize, early 20s, thin, with a nervous energy about him. He wore the standard Elmwood stable hand uniform, but moved with the uncertainty of someone unfamiliar with his surroundings. Can I help you? James asked, standing. The young man startled slightly. Oh, I'm Tyler, new transfer, just familiarizing myself with the facility. This area is restricted, James said evenly. Specialized training in progress. Right, sorry. Tyler's eyes darted to Thunderbolt, then back to James. Dr. Wilson asked me to check if the stall was clean before the board meeting. James's instincts, honed by years in the military, registered the inconsistency immediately. Dr. Wilson doesn't have authorization for this area, and the stalls are my responsibility during training. Tyler backed away, hands raised. No problem, just following orders. I'll tell him you've got it covered. After the young man left, James examined Thunderbolt's stall carefully, looking for anything out of place. The stallion seemed undisturbed, but James couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He pulled out his phone and texted Frank. Keep an eye on the new guy, Tyler. Don't let him near this wing when I'm not here. At exactly 2 o'clock, the isolation wing doors opened and Morgan entered, followed by 6 board members in business attire. Victor Shaw led the group, his silver hair and tailored suit projecting authority. Dr. Wilson trailed behind, a smug expression on his face. Mr. Miller, Morgan began formally, the board has requested a demonstration of your progress with Thunderbolt. James nodded, noting the tension in her posture. This wasn't a friendly visit. It was a tribunal. Ladies and gentlemen, he addressed the group, what you're about to see may not look impressive by conventional standards. There won't be any riding or dramatic displays of control. What I'll demonstrate instead is the foundation of trust we're building, the essential groundwork for any meaningful progress. Victor Shaw made a dismissive noise. Ms. Reynolds claims you've made significant breakthroughs. I see a horse in a stall and a man making excuses. James met his gaze steadily. With respect, Mr. Shaw, breakthrough is a relative term. 2 weeks ago, no human could enter that stall without risking serious injury. Today, I'll show you what's possible when you prioritize trust over dominance. He turned to the stall, clicking the training device once. Thunderbolt immediately approached the door, ears forward. James entered the stall calmly, closing the door behind him. The board members murmured in surprise as the stallion remained calm, accepting James's presence without aggression. Impressive, one of the female board members commented. I've heard about this animal's reputation. Basic desensitization, Wilson interjected. Hardly revolutionary. James ignored him, continuing his demonstration. He removed a light saddle pad from a hook and showed it to Thunderbolt, who sniffed it cautiously. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he placed it on the horse's back. Thunderbolt tensed momentarily but remained in place, accepting the unfamiliar weight. 2 weeks ago, he would have kicked down walls if anyone tried that, Morgan pointed out. James removed the pad and replaced it with a soft rope, gently looping it around Thunderbolt's neck in a loose approximation of a lead. The stallion accepted this too, though with slightly more hesitation. What's your timeline for actual riding? Victor asked, skepticism heavy in his voice. That depends on Thunderbolt, James replied honestly. I won't rush him and risk destroying the trust we've built. So you have no concrete timeline, Victor pressed. Just open-ended experimentation while we continue funding this project. What I have is a proven methodology that respects the animal's psychological needs, James countered. Force him back into traditional training, and you'll lose everything we've gained. Victor turned to Morgan. This is exactly what I warned about. Sentiment over business. We need results, not philosophy. Before Morgan could respond, Thunderbolt suddenly tensed, his ears flattening against his head. James immediately recognized the signs of fear. The stallion's eyes fixed on something beyond the stall. Tyler, who had appeared at the far end of the aisle, watching. James removed the rope and moved to exit the stall, not wanting to be trapped if Thunderbolt panicked. But as he reached for the latch, the stallion let out a pained squeal, rearing up suddenly. What the hell? James muttered, jumping back. Thunderbolt was in full panic now, charging the stall walls, eyes wild with terror. The board members retreated hastily. Wilson looked oddly satisfied by the chaos, while Morgan's face showed genuine concern. James scanned the area, looking for the trigger. His eyes landed on Tyler, who was holding something in his hand, a small black device with an antenna, a remote control. In that instant, understanding clicked into place. James moved quickly to the stall door, letting himself out before Thunderbolt could injure either of them. As soon as he was clear, he sprinted down the aisle toward Tyler. The young man's eyes widened. He dropped the device and turned to flee, but James was faster. He caught Tyler by the collar, slamming him against the wall with military precision. What did you do to that horse? James demanded, his voice deadly calm. Tyler struggled against his grip. Nothing, let me go. James reached down and picked up the fallen device. It was a modified remote, the kind used for electric fencing. Who put you up to this? I don't know what you're talking about. James, Morgan's voice cut through the confrontation. She had followed him, her face pale with shock. What's happening? Someone modified this stall, James explained, still holding Tyler firmly. Installed some kind of shock device, and your new stable hand here has the remote. Morgan's eyes hardened as she examined the device. Who authorized this, Tyler? The young man's defiance crumbled under her icy stare. Dr. Wilson said it was a training aid, standard procedure for difficult horses. Wilson, pues? Morgan's voice was dangerously quiet. And Mr. Shaw, Tyler added, his words tumbling out now. They said it would help prove the horse was untrainable, that it was for the good of the company. Morgan's face went completely still, a mask of controlled fury. Get security, she ordered James. Have them escort Tyler to my office and remain with him, then meet me in the conference room. She turned on her heel, stalking back toward the board members, her posture rigid with anger. James handed Tyler off to security, then returned to Thunderbolt's stall. The stallion was still agitated, moving restlessly in the confined space. A quick inspection revealed what James had suspected. Small electrodes had been installed in strategic locations around the stall, designed to deliver shocks to the horse when activated. "I'm sorry, big guy," James said softly, removing the devices. "This wasn't your fault." He spent 20 minutes calming Thunderbolt, using the techniques they'd practiced. Consistent voice, gentle movements, the clicking device now associated with safety. Gradually, the stallion's panic subsided, though wariness remained in his eyes. Once Thunderbolt was settled, James made his way to the main building's conference room. Inside, he found a scene of corporate warfare in progress. Morgan stood at the head of the table, her voice cold and precise as she addressed the board. "The deliberate sabotage of a $5 million investment, the violation of our training protocols, the disregard for both animal welfare and corporate ethics." She placed the remote device on the table, and all of it apparently sanctioned by our chairman and head trainer. Victor Shaw's face was a mask of controlled disdain. "These are serious allegations, Morgan, based on the word of a part-time stable hand and your pet project trainer." "We have the device," Morgan countered. "We have Tyler's testimony, and we have security footage." This last part seemed to catch Victor by surprise. His composure slipped momentarily. "Yes, Victor," Morgan continued, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "The same cameras you insisted we install throughout the facility, including the isolation wing. Everything has been recorded, including your private conversation with Dr. Todd Wilson yesterday about ensuring today's demonstration would fail." Wilson, seated beside Victor, paled visibly. "That's not. We were discussing legitimate training alternatives." "Alternatives that included electrocuting a valuable animal to prove a point?" Morgan's voice was razor sharp. "The ethics committee will be fascinated by your interpretation." She turned to the other board members. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've called legal counsel. They're preparing a full investigation into this matter. In the meantime, I'm invoking my authority as CEO to suspend both Mr. Shaw and Dr. Wilson pending the outcome." Victor stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. I am the chairman of this board, and subject to the same ethical standards as every employee," Morgan cut him off. "The bylaws are quite clear on this point. Deliberate sabotage of company assets falls under gross misconduct." The tension in the room was palpable. James remained by the door, watching the corporate drama unfold with detached interest. His concern was for Thunderbolt, not corporate politics. Eventually, Victor and Wilson were escorted from the building by security. The remaining board members dispersed for an emergency closed session, leaving Morgan and James alone in the conference room. Morgan sank into a chair, the weight of the confrontation finally showing in her posture. "How's Thunderbolt?" "Shaken but recovering. The trust we built helped him stabilize faster than he would have otherwise." "And the damage to that trust?" James considered this. "Significant but not irreparable. He still allowed me to approach him afterward." "That's a good sign." Morgan nodded, relief evident in her expression. Then she straightened, professional demeanor returning. "The board will want a revised training plan. With Wilson gone, we'll need to restructure the entire program." "And Shaw?" "The investigation will take time. He has allies on the board." She looked up at James. "But for now, we have breathing room." James moved to the window, looking out over the immaculate Elmwood grounds. "You knew, didn't you, about the cameras in the isolation wing? You suspected something like this might happen." Morgan joined him at the window. "I installed those cameras to monitor you," she admitted, "to protect my investment. I never imagined I'd use them to protect you from my own people." "Not me," James corrected. "Thunderbolt." "Yes," Morgan agreed softly. "Thunderbolt." They stood in silence for a moment. An unexpected alliance formed in the aftermath of betrayal. "Sometimes we build empires of steel and concrete," Morgan said finally, "only to discover that the real foundation is built on trust." She turned to face him. "Thank you for reminding me of that." The next morning, James arrived at Elmwood to find the atmosphere transformed. News of Victor and Wilson's suspension had spread like wildfire through the staff. Frank met him at the entrance, a glint of satisfaction in his weathered eyes. "Heard what happened," the older man said. "About time somebody stood up to those two, always putting profit before the animals." "Just doing what needed to be done," James replied, continuing toward the isolation wing. "Morgan's been here since dawn," Frank called after him. "Something about a new setup for Thunderbolt." James found Morgan in the isolation wing, supervising workers as they removed the partition between Thunderbolt's stall and the adjacent empty one, creating a larger space. Natural light streamed in from newly uncovered windows, and fresh bedding covered the floor. "Morning," she greeted him. "I thought we might give him more room to move. Less confinement might help with his recovery." James nodded approval. "Good thinking. The more space he has to express natural behaviors, the faster he'll heal psychologically." "I've also ordered the installation of a small attached paddock," Morgan continued, "so he can have outdoor access without the stress of being moved through the facility." "You've been busy." Morgan's expression was determined. "The board has given me temporary full authority while the investigation proceeds. I intend to use it wisely." As the workers finished and departed, James approached Thunderbolt, who was exploring his expanded quarters with cautious interest. The stallion acknowledged James with a soft nicker, a sound that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. "He remembers you," Morgan observed, "even after yesterday's trauma." "We've built something solid," James agreed, "but we still have a long way to go before the showcase." "About that," Morgan hesitated, "the board has agreed to postpone Thunderbolt's debut. Given the circumstances, they've accepted that he needs more time." Relief washed through James. "That's the best news you could have given me." "Don't celebrate too much," Morgan warned. "They still expect results, just on a more realistic timeline." James nodded understanding. "I'll need to adjust my approach after yesterday's setback. Might need to bring in some specialized equipment." "Whatever you need," Morgan assured him. "You have my full support." As they discussed plans for the coming weeks, the door to the isolation wing opened, and Mrs. Larson appeared with Lily. The older woman looked apologetic. "I'm so sorry to interrupt, but she was absolutely insistent on coming to see the horse today. Something about a book she wants to read to him." James looked at his daughter in surprise. She clutched a worn copy of Black Beauty to her chest, her expression determined. Morgan glanced at James questioningly. He nodded, and she moved toward Mrs. Larson. "Why don't I show you our therapy horses while your charge visits with Thunderbolt? We have a lovely Arabian mare who just had a foal." As Morgan led Mrs. Larson away, James turned to Lily. "You want to read to him?" Lily nodded solemnly. "He had a rough day yesterday," James explained gently. "He might be more nervous than before." Lily simply waited, book in hand, her quiet persistence reminding James so much of her mother that it made his chest ache. "All right," he conceded, "but you sit on the stool outside the stall, and I stay with you the whole time." James set up the stool at a safe distance from Thunderbolt's expanded stall. The stallion watched with interest as Lily settled herself, opening the book to the first chapter. In a soft, clear voice, a voice James had feared he might never hear again, Lily began to read. "The first place that I can well remember was a large, pleasant meadow." Thunderbolt's ears swiveled forward, focusing intently on the sound of her voice. He moved closer to the stall door, his posture relaxed, head lowered slightly as if listening. James watched in amazement as his daughter read page after page, her voice growing stronger with each word. Thunderbolt remained completely captivated, occasionally nickering softly as if encouraging her to continue. After nearly 30 minutes, Lily paused, looking up at her father. "Can I come again tomorrow to read the next chapter?" James struggled to find his voice past the lump in his throat. "Yes, Lilypad, I think he'd like that very much." A small smile touched her lips, the most genuine expression of joy he'd seen from her in 3 years. "He understands. He knows what it's like to be afraid." In that moment, watching his daughter connect with the traumatized stallion, James felt a shift inside himself, a loosening of the tight knot of guilt and grief he'd carried since Sarah's death. The healing wasn't just happening for Thunderbolt, or even for Lily. It was happening for all of them. As Lily continued reading, Morgan returned, stopping at the entrance to observe the scene. The wonder on her face mirrored what James felt, the recognition of something profound happening in this quiet exchange between a wounded child and a frightened horse. She moved to stand beside James. "Is she always this good with animals?" "She used to be," James replied softly. "Before the accident. She was just starting riding lessons when—" He trailed off, the memory still too painful. Morgan nodded understanding. "And now?" "Now I think they're helping each other heal." They watched in companionable silence as Lily read, her voice growing more animated with each page, Thunderbolt hanging on every word. Fear and trust can't exist in the same space, Morgan said quietly, echoing James's earlier words. She's building trust in herself again, isn't she? We all are, James replied. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm of steady progress. With Wilson gone and Morgan's full support, James implemented a comprehensive rehabilitation program for Thunderbolt. The expanded stall and private paddock allowed the stallion more freedom of movement, critical for his psychological recovery. Lily came every afternoon after school to read to Thunderbolt, working her way steadily through Black Beauty. The effect on both child and horse was remarkable. Lily spoke more each day, her voice growing stronger, more confident. Thunderbolt's progress accelerated, his trust deepening, not just with James, but with Lily as well. By the end of the 3rd week, James was able to lead Thunderbolt around the private paddock using a soft rope halter. The stallion followed willingly, no longer fighting human guidance. James introduced a lightweight saddle, letting Thunderbolt become accustomed to the feel of it on his back for short periods. Morgan visited daily, observing the progress with increasing satisfaction. The board, impressed by the transformation in both the horse and the company's atmosphere, had extended their timeline for Thunderbolt's debut. On a warm Tuesday afternoon, James was working with Thunderbolt in the paddock when Frank appeared at the fence. "Got a visitor," the older man announced. "Says she's from the military. Asked for you specifically." James frowned. "Did she give a name?" "Captain Rodriguez. Said you'd know her." James's expression cleared. "I do. She's an old colleague. Can you watch Thunderbolt for a few minutes?" Frank nodded, taking the lead rope. "Take your time. We'll be fine." James found Captain Elena Rodriguez waiting in the main office, her army uniform crisp and precise. At 38, she looked exactly as he remembered. No-nonsense demeanor, intelligent eyes, and the watchful posture of someone who had seen combat. "Miller," she greeted him with a nod. "Been a while." 3 years, James agreed. "What brings you to Kentucky, Captain?" Elena glanced around to ensure they were alone. "Your name came up in connection with Elmwood. Got curious what my old K9 training partner was doing at a fancy horse farm." They stepped outside, walking toward a quiet area away from the main buildings. "I'm helping with a difficult case," James explained. "Using some of our old techniques," Elena nodded. "That's what I figured. Word is you're working miracles with an unrideable stallion." "Not miracles, just patience in the Miller method." A smile flickered across Elena's face. "That's what we called it in the unit, you know. After you left, the Miller method. Your techniques are still being used with our trauma-affected service animals." James absorbed this information with mixed emotions. "I'm glad something good came from that time." They walked in silence for a moment before Elena spoke again. "How's Lily?" "Better. Actually, she's part of the breakthrough with the stallion. She's been reading to him, started talking again." Elena's eyes widened. "James, that's wonderful. Sarah would be so proud." The mention of his wife sent a familiar pang through him, but it was duller now, less raw. "Yeah, she would. Which brings me to why I'm really here." Elena stopped, turning to face him directly. "The Army's establishing a new program for veterans with PTSD using equine therapy. They're looking for someone to head it up, someone with both military experience and expertise in animal psychology." James stared at her. "You're offering me a job?" "Consulting at first. Could become permanent if you're interested." She handed him a folder. "All the details are in there. It would mean working with soldiers, James. Men and women who are going through what you went through after losing Sarah. People who need what you know." James took the folder, conflicted. "I have commitments here. To Thunderbolt. To Lily's stability." "Of course," Elena nodded. "Think about it. The program doesn't launch for 3 months, and it's based at Fort Knox, less than an hour from here." As they walked back toward the main facility, James spotted Morgan observing Thunderbolt's paddock from a distance. She turned as they approached, her expression questioning. "Ms. Reynolds," James said, "this is Captain Elena Rodriguez, an old colleague from my Army days." Morgan extended her hand. "Captain, welcome to Elmwood." "Thank you," Elena replied. "Impressive operation you have here." "James is a significant part of that now," Morgan said, surprising James with her praise. "His work with Thunderbolt has been revolutionary for our program." Elena smiled knowingly. That doesn't surprise me. He always had a gift. She checked her watch. I should be going. James, think about what we discussed. The offer stands. After Elena departed, Morgan turned to James with raised eyebrows. Job offer? Consulting position. Equine therapy program for veterans with PTSD. Morgan's expression was unreadable. Are you considering it? I don't know, James admitted. It would mean staying in the area, but dividing my time. Morgan was quiet for a moment. You should think about it. It sounds meaningful work. They walked together toward Thunderbolt's paddock, where Frank was still leading the stallion in smooth circles. The horse moved with newfound confidence, his coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. He's come so far, Morgan observed. We all have. James glanced at her, noting the change in her demeanor over the past weeks. The cold, data-driven CEO had been replaced by someone more balanced, still efficient and focused, but with a newfound appreciation for the intangible aspects of her work. The investigation into Victor and Wilson, he asked, concluded yesterday. The board voted unanimously to remove them permanently. Victor's shares will be purchased by the company over the next year. Morgan's satisfaction was evident in her voice. Elmwood is entering a new era, one that honors both tradition and innovation. They reached the paddock fence and Thunderbolt noticed them, nickering in greeting, a sound that still amazed James every time he heard it. Frank handed the lead rope back to James with a knowing smile before discreetly withdrawing. We've scheduled Thunderbolt's debut for the spring showcase, Morgan continued. That gives us another 8 weeks of preparation. Do you think he'll be ready for a rider by then? James assessed the stallion thoughtfully. With continued progress? Yes. The question is who that rider should be. Not you. I'll get him ready, but he needs a consistent partner for the long term. Someone who understands his history and needs. Morgan leaned against the fence, watching as Thunderbolt nudged James's shoulder affectionately. We'll find the right person. Someone with both skill and compassion. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the paddock, James reflected on the journey of the past 3 weeks. From a maintenance man with a hidden past to a recognized expert reclaiming his calling. From a terrified, aggressive stallion to an animal learning to trust again. From a silent, traumatized child to a girl finding her voice through helping another wounded soul. And perhaps most surprisingly, from a cold, data-driven CEO to a woman rediscovering the heart of horsemanship her father had tried to teach her. Sometimes we build empires of steel and concrete, Morgan had said, only to discover that the real foundation is built on trust. Looking at Thunderbolt's transformed demeanor, James couldn't help but agree. The strongest things weren't broken, they were heard. And in that hearing, healing became possible for everyone involved. The Kentucky morning broke crisp and clear, sunlight streaming through the paddock's eastern fence. 4 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Victor and Wilson, transforming Elmwood in ways both subtle and profound. The tension that had permeated the facility had dissipated, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. James arrived early, as had become his habit, carrying a lightweight saddle and bridle. Thunderbolt waited at the paddock gate, nickering in greeting, a sound that still amazed everyone who had known the stallion in his previous state. The transformation from terrified, aggressive animal to engaged, curious partner continued to progress daily. Frank appeared with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, handing one to James. Big day today? James nodded, sipping the strong brew. If he's ready. First time on his back? We'll see, won't push if he's not there yet. Frank leaned against the fence, watching as James entered the paddock and greeted Thunderbolt with a gentle hand on his neck. Never thought I'd see the day. That horse was headed for a bullet or permanent isolation before you came along. He just needed someone to listen, James replied, setting the tack aside to begin their morning ritual of grooming. The methodical brushing had become a bonding exercise, establishing trust through touch. Morgan's bringing some board members by later, Frank mentioned casually. Said they wanted to see the progress firsthand. James nodded, unsurprised. Since becoming interim chairperson following Victor's removal, Morgan had been gradually reorienting the board toward a more balanced approach, one that valued both profit and ethical treatment. The remaining members had been skeptical at first, but the transformation in Thunderbolt was difficult to argue with. We'll be ready, James said. Or we won't. Either way, they'll see the truth. Frank chuckled. You've changed her, you know. Morgan used to be all about the numbers, the data. Now she's out here watching the horses in the morning, asking questions about their personalities. She changed herself, James corrected. Just needed reminding of why she started this place. After grooming, James began the day's training session with familiar groundwork exercises. Thunderbolt moved with increasing confidence, responding to subtle cues, no longer startling at unexpected sounds. The music from the paddock's weatherproof speaker, Bach today, created a bubble of calm around them. Morning. Morgan's voice came from the fence line. She was dressed more casually than usual, riding boots instead of heels, fitted jacket instead of a blazer. How's our star pupil today? Steady, James replied. We're thinking about a big step. Understanding lit her eyes. First ride? If he's ready, no guarantees. Morgan opened the gate and entered the paddock, something she'd begun doing regularly over the past weeks. Thunderbolt acknowledged her with a slight turn of his head, but showed no fear, another milestone in his recovery. The board will be here at 11, she said, watching as James led Thunderbolt in a wide circle. No pressure, but they're considering a complete restructuring of our training program based on your methods. A formal department focused on rehabilitation cases. James raised an eyebrow. Sounds expensive. And profitable, if successful. Morgan smiled slightly. Turns out there's a market for second chances. Owners with valuable but difficult horses are willing to pay premium rates for rehabilitation instead of replacement. They worked together for the next hour, Morgan assisting as James gradually introduced the saddle pad, then the lightweight training saddle. Thunderbolt accepted each step with minimal resistance, though his muscles tensed visibly beneath the unfamiliar weight. He's doing well, Morgan observed. Better than I expected, honestly. He trusts us now, James replied. Makes all the difference. As they prepared to move to the next phase, the sound of a car door slamming disrupted the peaceful atmosphere. Thunderbolt's head came up, ears pricked forward alertly, but not in fear. Lily appeared at the paddock fence, clutching her worn copy of Black Beauty in a small paper bag. Mrs. Larson stood back at a respectful distance, waving at James. School holiday, Morgan explained, seeing James's surprised expression. I told Mrs. Larson it was fine to bring her earlier than usual. James opened the gate, letting Lily in. She approached Thunderbolt confidently, stopping a few feet away as she'd been taught. Good morning, she said softly to the horse. Her voice, once so rare, had become a regular presence in the paddock over the past weeks. I brought you something. From the paper bag, she carefully extracted a small, perfectly formed carrot. James nodded his permission, and she held it out on her flat palm. Thunderbolt delicately took the offering, his lips velvet soft against her hand. He's wearing his saddle, Lily observed, excitement creeping into her voice. Are you going to ride him today? Thinking about it, James replied, if he tells me he's ready. Lily nodded seriously, understanding the philosophy that had guided their work with Thunderbolt. Can I read to him first? It might help. James exchanged glances with Morgan, who smiled and nodded. I think that's a wonderful idea. Lily settled on a small mounting block near the fence, opening her book to where they'd left off. Thunderbolt moved closer, seemingly drawn by the familiar ritual. As she began to read, his ears swiveled forward, focused entirely on her voice. The farmer who had driven me out and his boy stopped the horse to deliver something at a public house. I shall never forget the next half hour. Standing for the first time in an open stable door, I looked across at a high brick wall with a train running along the top of it, puffing out steam and smoke. The passage from Black Beauty about the horse's first experience with trains seemed almost prophetic, given the day's planned milestone. James and Morgan stood back, letting the healing magic of Lily's reading work its effect on Thunderbolt. After 15 minutes, Lily closed the book. I think he's ready now, she said with childlike certainty. James smiled. Let's find out. He approached Thunderbolt with the soft bridle they'd been practicing with, designed without a harsh bit, using gentle pressure points instead. The stallion lowered his head willingly, accepting the equipment without resistance. Good boy, James murmured, running a hand along the powerful neck. Just like we practiced. Morgan and Lily retreated to the fence, giving them space. James led Thunderbolt to the mounting block, positioned him carefully, and checked every strap and buckle one final time. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he placed his foot in the stirrup and swung his weight halfway up, pausing to let Thunderbolt adjust to the pressure. The stallion tensed but remained still, his training holding despite his anxiety. James eased himself fully into the saddle, keeping his weight light, his body relaxed. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Thunderbolt stood frozen, processing this new experience, this ultimate test of trust. Then, almost imperceptibly, the stallion relaxed. His back softened, his breathing steadied. James released the breath he'd been holding, gently squeezing with his calves to ask Thunderbolt to walk forward. The first steps were tentative, uncertain. Then, as confidence built, they became more fluid. James guided Thunderbolt in a wide circle around the paddock, using the lightest possible cues, letting the horse find his balance and rhythm. From the fence, Lily clapped her hands in delight. "You're doing it! He's not scared anymore." Morgan's expression was one of genuine wonder. "Remarkable," she said softly. "Absolutely remarkable." After a brief walk, James brought Thunderbolt back to the mounting block and dismounted as carefully as he'd mounted, praising the stallion lavishly. The horse's eyes were bright, his posture proud, as if he understood the significance of what they'd accomplished. "That," James said, removing the bridle, "is enough for today. Always end on success." Morgan nodded agreement. "The board will be impressed, even with just that short ride. It's more than anyone thought possible 6 weeks ago." As they led Thunderbolt to the water trough, allowing him to drink and relax after his milestone achievement, the sound of vehicles approaching signaled the board members' arrival. Frank appeared at the paddock gate. "They're early," he announced, "and there's someone else with them. Visitor from Fort Knox, asking for you specifically, James." James frowned, handing Thunderbolt's lead to Morgan. "I'll go see what's up. Lily, why don't you stay with Morgan and tell her about the chapter you read today?" As James walked toward the main facility, he spotted Elena Rodriguez in her Army uniform, standing beside a group of well-dressed board members. She smiled and waved when she saw him. "Captain," James greeted her, "didn't expect to see you again so soon." "The program I mentioned is moving forward faster than anticipated," Elena explained. "I was hoping to observe your methods in action, if that's all right." Before James could respond, Morgan approached, having handed Thunderbolt off to Frank. "Captain Rodriguez, welcome back to Elmwood. I understand you're interested in Mr. Miller's rehabilitation techniques." "Very much so," Elena confirmed. "The Army is establishing an equine therapy program for veterans with PTSD. James's approach could be transformative for our soldiers." Morgan nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps we should discuss a formal partnership. Elmwood has been considering expanding into therapeutic applications." The board members, who had been observing this exchange with interest, murmured their approval. The tallest of them, a distinguished woman in her 60s, stepped forward. "Ms. Reynolds, perhaps you could arrange a demonstration of Mr. Miller's methods. The reports we've received are quite promising." "Actually," James interjected, "we've just completed a significant milestone. Thunderbolt accepted a rider for the first time today." The board members looked suitably impressed. Elena's eyes lit up with professional interest. "Would it be possible to observe your follow-up work?" she asked. "See how you build on a breakthrough like that?" James glanced at Morgan, who nodded encouragement. "Of course, though it won't be dramatic. Consistency and patience are the foundations of the approach." As the group made their way back to Thunderbolt's paddock, James felt a strange sense of coming full circle. 6 weeks ago, he had been a maintenance man with a hidden past. Now he stood at the center of Elmwood's future, his methods being considered for both corporate expansion and military application. The paddock came into view, and James stopped short. Lily was inside with Frank, leading Thunderbolt in a small circle, her tiny hand confidently holding the lead rope. The stallion followed her with gentle attentiveness, his massive frame moving delicately to match her pace. "My daughter," James explained to the observers, emotion tightening his throat. "She's become an essential part of Thunderbolt's rehabilitation." Elena watched the scene with professional interest. "The connection between them is remarkable. How long has she been working with him?" "About 3 weeks, James replied. "She reads to him daily. Black Beauty." One of the board members chuckled. "Literary therapy for horses? That's certainly novel." "It's about consistent, calm presence," James explained. "The content matters less than the ritual and connection. For a traumatized animal or person, predictability creates safety." Morgan added, We've documented measurable decreases in stress indicators during and after these reading sessions. Heart rate, cortisol levels, respiratory patterns all show significant improvement. The board members nodded, clearly impressed by the blend of intuitive methods and quantifiable results. Elena watched Lily and Thunderbolt with speculative interest. "Have you considered incorporating children into the veterans program?" she asked James. "The dynamic I'm seeing here suggests therapeutic potential for both the animal and the child." "It's worth exploring," James agreed. "Trauma recognizes trauma. Sometimes that creates a unique pathway for healing." As they approached the paddock, Lily looked up, momentarily shy at the sight of so many strangers. She stopped, causing Thunderbolt to halt as well, his body protectively angled toward her. "It's okay, Lilypad," James called. "These people are here to learn about Thunderbolt's progress." Frank helped Lily exit the paddock, and James took over, bringing Thunderbolt to the fence so the visitors could observe him more closely. The stallion's demeanor was calm but alert, showing none of the fear or aggression that had once defined him. "6 weeks ago, this horse was considered unmanageable," Morgan explained to the group. "He had injured 3 professional trainers and was on the verge of being deemed unsalvageable." "What changed?" one of the board members asked. James ran a hand along Thunderbolt's neck. "We stopped trying to control him and started listening to him. Fear and trust can't exist in the same space. When you build one, you eliminate the other." He demonstrated some of the training techniques, the clicker communication, the gradual desensitization, the consistent, clear expectations. Elena took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the specific applications for combat-affected veterans. The board members watched with growing enthusiasm, clearly seeing the commercial potential. One of them, a shrewd-looking man in his 50s, stepped forward. "Ms. Reynolds, I believe we've seen enough. The board is prepared to approve the Rehabilitation Department proposal. With Mr. Miller at the helm, of course." Morgan's expression remained professionally composed, but her eyes revealed her satisfaction. "Excellent. We'll prepare a formal business plan for review next week." As the board members drifted back toward the main facility, Elena lingered. "James, our offer still stands. The program needs someone with your expertise. Part-time consulting would work if you're committed to staying with Elmwood." Before James could respond, Morgan joined them. "Perhaps we could discuss a cooperative arrangement, Captain. The military program and Elmwood's Rehabilitation Department could benefit from shared research and methodology." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "That has potential. Joint development of protocols, shared case studies." She glanced at James. "Assuming our expert is willing to divide his time." James looked between the two women, then beyond them to where Lily stood watching Thunderbolt with undisguised affection. Something that had been broken in his daughter was healing, just as something broken in the stallion was being restored. "I'd need to establish boundaries," he said finally. "Lily's stability comes first, and Thunderbolt's ongoing training remains a priority." "Of course," Morgan agreed immediately. "We can structure the arrangement to accommodate your family needs." "The same goes for the military program," Elena added. "Flexible scheduling, minimal travel." "We want your expertise, James, but we understand your priorities." The conversation was interrupted by Frank, who approached with an urgent expression. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation at the main stable. One of the new arrivals is having a panic attack in the transport trailer. Won't come out, attacking anyone who gets close." Morgan frowned. "Which horse?" "The gray mare from that abuse case in Tennessee. Transport just arrived. Dr. Peterson's trying sedation, but she's too agitated for a clean injection." James exchanged glances with Morgan. "Another traumatized case?" She nodded. "Seized by authorities from a neglect situation. We agreed to take her as part of our new rehabilitation focus." James turned to Elena. "Want to see these methods applied in real time?" Elena's eyes lit with professional interest. "Absolutely." "Lily needs to stay here," James said to Frank. "Can you keep an eye on her?" "Of course," Frank agreed. "Mrs. Larson and I will make sure she's fine." The scene at the main stable was one of controlled chaos. A transport trailer was backed up to the unloading ramp, and concerned staff members clustered nearby. From inside the trailer came the unmistakable sounds of a panicked horse. Kicking, snorting, the metal walls reverberating with impact. Amelia Peterson, Elmwood's new head veterinarian who had replaced Wilson's team, approached them with a worried expression. She's been in there for 40 minutes. Won't come down the ramp. Attacks if we try to enter. I'm concerned she'll injure herself severely if this continues. What's her history? James asked, assessing the situation. Starvation, prolonged confinement, evidence of physical abuse, Dr. Peterson replied grimly. She's been at a rehabilitation farm for initial medical treatment, but they weren't equipped for her psychological issues. James nodded, thinking quickly. Everyone needs to back away from the trailer. Too many people, too much pressure. As the staff retreated, James turned to Morgan. The radio from Thunderbolt's area. Can someone bring it here? Morgan immediately dispatched an assistant, who returned moments later with the weatherproof speaker. James set it up near the trailer, playing the same Bach cello suites that had become part of Thunderbolt's daily routine. Music? Dr. Peterson asked skeptically. Consistent environment, James explained, helps establish a pattern separate from her trauma triggers. He approached the trailer slowly, stopping well back from the ramp. The gray mare was visible inside, her coat dull with stress, eyes wide and rolling. She pawed aggressively at the floor, ready to strike out at any perceived threat. Hey there, James said softly, making no move to come closer. Rough day, isn't it? The mare's ears flicked toward his voice, though her posture remained defensive. What are you doing? Dr. Peterson whispered from behind him. Establishing presence without pressure, James replied without turning around. She needs to know I'm not going to force her to do anything. For the next 30 minutes, James simply sat on a bale of hay near the trailer, occasionally speaking to the mare in a low conversational tone. The music played softly in the background. Gradually, the sounds of panic from inside the trailer diminished. The kicking stopped, then the snorting. Elena watched with professional fascination. It's the same approach you use with Thunderbolt. And with combat-affected military dogs, James confirmed. Trauma responses are universal across species. The key is creating space where fear isn't necessary. Eventually, the mare appeared at the edge of the ramp, still inside the trailer but looking out. Her eyes remained wary, but the blind panic had subsided. There you are, James said softly. Much better view from there, isn't it? He reached into his pocket and produced an apple, which he placed on the ground halfway between himself and the ramp, then returned to his hay bale. The mare watched, nostrils flaring as she caught the scent. Minutes ticked by. The gathered staff remained at a distance, observing in silent amazement as the mare finally, hesitantly, placed one hoof on the ramp, then another. The descent was slow, pausing frequently to assess for threats, but eventually she stood fully outside the trailer. The apple remained untouched on the ground, a potential reward requiring further courage. The mare eyed it, then James, then the open space around her, calculating risk versus reward. No rush, James murmured. All the time in the world. Dr. Peterson whispered to Morgan, I've never seen anything like this. We usually have to sedate difficult arrivals. Different approach, different results, Morgan replied simply. After another 10 minutes, the mare finally approached the apple, snatched it quickly, and retreated several steps to consume it. James remained motionless, allowing her this small victory without pressure for more. Now what? Dr. Peterson asked. Now we let her decompress, James said, standing slowly. Set up a quiet stall away from the main traffic areas. No pressure to interact, regular schedule for food and water. Classical conditioning, establishing that humans bring good things, not threats. Dr. Peterson nodded, clearly reassessing her approach. I'll make the arrangements immediately. As the mare was carefully guided to her new accommodations by staff following James's instructions, Elena turned to him with newfound respect. That was remarkable, she said, and exactly what our veterans need. Someone who understands that healing can't be forced, only facilitated. Morgan, who had been observing with keen interest, added, It's the foundation of what we're building here now, creating space for recovery on the animal's terms, not ours. James watched the mare disappear into the barn, thinking of Thunderbolt's journey and how far they'd all come. 6 weeks ago, I was fixing sprinklers and hiding from my past. Funny how life comes full circle. The next morning dawned with the soft mist that often cloaked the Kentucky hills in early spring. James arrived at Thunderbolt's paddock to find Morgan already there, watching the stallion graze peacefully in the dewy grass. You're early, he commented, joining her at the fence. Board meeting prep, she explained. Needed to clear my head first. She gestured toward Thunderbolt. He looks different today. More settled. James nodded agreement. Yesterday was a breakthrough. First ride changes the relationship. They stood in companionable silence, watching the powerful animal who had brought them together through such unlikely circumstances. The morning light caught the droplets of dew in his mane, turning them to diamonds. I've been thinking about your potential arrangement with the military program, Morgan said finally. It makes sense for you professionally, but I'm concerned about the impact on Thunderbolt's progress. He needs consistency, James agreed, especially in these early stages. Morgan turned to face him directly, which is why I'd like to propose an alternative. I've been working with the board on establishing a permanent therapeutic riding center here at Elmwood. Veterans, trauma survivors, children with special needs. A comprehensive program. James raised an eyebrow. Quite a departure from the elite training facility model. A diversification, Morgan corrected. The traditional training program continues, but we add this new dimension. With you as director, if you're interested. The offer caught James by surprise. That's substantial. It makes business sense, Morgan continued. The therapeutic market is growing, grants are available, and our existing infrastructure can be adapted with minimal investment. She paused. But more importantly, it's the right thing to do. You've shown us that. Before James could respond, the sound of a car approaching drew their attention. Frank's truck pulled up, and Lily hopped out, waving excitedly. She ran to the paddock fence, clutching a folded paper. Dad, look what I made in art class. James accepted the paper, unfolding it to reveal a colorful drawing. It showed Thunderbolt with a James on his back, and beside them Lily riding a small pony. Morgan and Frank stood in the background, all surrounded by the Elmwood facility rendered in a child's perspective. That's beautiful, Lily Pad, James said, emotion tightening his throat. Is this what you want? To ride again? Lily nodded, her eyes bright with hope. If I can be brave like Thunderbolt, maybe I can try on. And James glanced at Morgan, who smiled encouragingly. We have several gentle therapy horses that would be perfect for beginners. When you're ready, of course. The moment was interrupted by Elena's arrival. She parked her army vehicle and approached the group, carrying a folder of official-looking documents. Morning, everyone, she greeted them. Hope I'm not too early. I brought the preliminary paperwork for the military consultation program. James? James looked from Elena to Morgan, then back to Lily's hopeful face and her drawing of their future. The pieces of his fractured life were realigning in ways he could never have anticipated 6 weeks ago. Actually, he said slowly, I think we might have a more comprehensive solution to discuss. The next hour was spent in Morgan's office, the three adults mapping out a collaborative vision that combined Elmwood's resources, the military's needs, and James's expertise. The plan that emerged was ambitious, but practical. A therapeutic riding center based at Elmwood that would serve both civilian and military clients, with James overseeing methodology and training. This could be a national model, Elena said, excitement evident in her voice, combining proven techniques with proper facilities and expert oversight. Morgan nodded agreement. Elmwood provides the infrastructure and ongoing research component. The military contributes funding and participants for the veterans program. And James brings the methodology that makes it all work. Speaking of methodology, Elena added, we should document the Miller method formally, create a training protocol that can be taught to others. James shifted uncomfortably at the name. It's just a collection of techniques passed down through my family, combined with military experience. It's more than that, Morgan insisted. It's a comprehensive approach to rehabilitation that addresses the root causes of trauma responses. It deserves proper documentation and recognition. As they finalized the preliminary agreement, James felt a sense of purpose settling over him. A calling he had run from after Sarah's death, now reclaimed on his own terms. The meeting concluded, and they walked together back to Thunderbolt's paddock, where Frank had been supervising Lily's interaction with the stallion. The sight that greeted them stopped James in his tracks. Lily stood inside the paddock, reading aloud from her book, while Thunderbolt listened attentively, his head lowered to her level. The massive stallion and small girl created a tableau of perfect trust, two traumatized souls finding healing in each other's company. That's what this program will be about, James said quietly. That right there. Elena nodded, professional assessment giving way to genuine emotion. Our veterans need exactly that kind of connection, something that understands their pain without judgment. As do the horses, Morgan added. It's symbiotic healing. Lily looked up, noticing their return. She waved excitedly. Dad, can I show them what Thunderbolt and I practiced? James entered the paddock, curious. What have you two been up to? With solemn concentration, Lily positioned herself beside Thunderbolt and made a subtle hand gesture James recognized from his own training sessions. To everyone's amazement, the stallion gently lowered himself to his knees, then carefully laid down completely on the soft grass. Liberty work, James murmured, astonished. She's taught him liberty work. Frank grinned from the fence line. Been watching you two like a hawk, that one. Picks up everything you do and tries it herself when you're not looking. Lily beamed with pride as Thunderbolt remained relaxed in his vulnerable position, clearly trusting her completely. He knows I won't hurt him, she explained simply, and I know he won't hurt me. The profound wisdom in her childish statement hung in the air. After a moment, she made another subtle gesture, and Thunderbolt rose gracefully to his feet, shaking himself before gently nuzzling her shoulder. When did she learn to do that? Morgan whispered, amazed. She didn't, James replied, emotion thick in his voice. They learned together. The spring showcase arrived on a perfect Kentucky day, the kind that seemed custom-made for new beginnings. The grandstands of Elmwood's main arena were filled to capacity with investors, industry professionals, and curious observers drawn by rumors of the facility's transformation. Behind the scenes, James adjusted Thunderbolt's simple bridle, checking each strap with meticulous care. The stallion stood calmly, occasionally nickering softly, a sound that still amazed everyone who had known him before. Ready for your debut, big guy? James murmured, running a hand along the glossy black neck. Morgan approached, refined elegant in her riding attire. As they had planned, she would be Thunderbolt's rider for the demonstration, a symbolic passing of the torch from rehabilitation to integration. Nervous? James asked, noting the tension in her posture. Terrified, she admitted with a small smile. It's been years since I performed in the ring, and never on a horse with Thunderbolt's history. You've been practicing together for weeks. He trusts you. James handed her the reins, and so do I. Morgan took a deep breath, centering herself. My father would have loved this moment, the CEO of Elmwood returning to actual horsemanship. He's watching, James said simply. They both are. They both knew he meant not only Morgan's father, but also Sarah, the woman whose death had set James on the path that eventually led him here. The announcer's voice echoed through the facility. Ladies and gentlemen, Elmwood Equestrian Center is proud to present a special demonstration of our new rehabilitation program. Please welcome Morgan Reynolds riding Thunderbolt with Program Director James Miller. They entered the arena together, James walking beside Morgan as she rode Thunderbolt at a calm walk. The crowd fell silent, many of them familiar with the stallion's notorious reputation. James stepped away, moving to the center of the arena as Morgan guided Thunderbolt in a perfect circle around him. The stallion moved with fluid grace, responsive to the lightest cues, his fear forgotten in the confidence of proper partnership. What you're witnessing, James addressed the crowd, is not just a trained horse performing. This is a demonstration of healing. 8 weeks ago, Thunderbolt was considered dangerous and unmanageable. Today, he's a willing partner, not through dominance or force, but through understanding and trust. Morgan transitioned Thunderbolt to a collected trot, then a canter, executing figures with precision that showcased both her skill and the stallion's intelligence. The crowd murmured in appreciation, clearly impressed by the transformation. As the demonstration continued, James explained the principles of the Miller method, the patience, the clear communication, the respect for the animal's experience. He outlined Elmwood's new therapeutic riding program and the partnership with the military for veteran rehabilitation. For the finale, Morgan brought Thunderbolt to the center of the arena beside James. With a subtle cue, the stallion performed the liberty work Lily had discovered, kneeling then lying down completely while Morgan remained mounted. The crowd gasped, then erupted in applause at this ultimate demonstration of trust. Morgan dismounted, standing between Thunderbolt and James as they acknowledged the ovation. The three of them, woman, man, and horse, represented a new beginning for Elmwood, a fusion of tradition and innovation, science and intuition. As they exited the arena to continued applause, Lily waited by the gate, beaming with pride. Beside her stood Elena in her army uniform, and Frank with his weathered smile. A new extended family forged through unlikely circumstances. "That was amazing," Lily exclaimed, hugging her father as he approached. "Everyone loved him." "They loved what he represents," James corrected gently, "the possibility of healing no matter how deep the wounds." Morgan handed Thunderbolt's reins to a waiting groom, her face flushed with exhilaration. "The board chairman wants to meet with us immediately. I think we just secured full funding for the therapeutic center." As the adults discussed next steps, Lily slipped away to where Thunderbolt was being untacked. She reached up to stroke his velvet nose, whispering something that made the stallion lower his head to her level. James watched his daughter with the horse that had changed all their lives, marveling at the journey they had traveled together. From a broken man hiding from his past to the architect of a program that would help countless others. From a traumatized child trapped in silence to a girl finding her voice through compassion. From a terrified, aggressive stallion to a confident partner willing to trust again. "Sometimes the strongest things don't need to be broken," he murmured, echoing the words he'd spoken to Morgan that first day. "They just need to be heard." Morgan followed his gaze to Lily and Thunderbolt, and sometimes the things that are broken can be rebuilt stronger than before. 1 year later, the Elmwood Therapeutic Riding Center celebrated its grand opening. The expanded facility now included specialized arenas for therapy sessions, comfortable accommodation for visiting veterans, and an education center where the Miller method was taught to practitioners from across the country. Thunderbolt had become the program's ambassador, his transformation from aggressive outcast to gentle therapy horse, serving as living proof of the method's effectiveness. Though he worked primarily with advanced riders, he had one special beginner he allowed on his back, Lily, who rode him every Saturday morning under James's watchful eye. James himself had found unexpected fulfillment in his role as director. The skills he had once used in the military now served a healing purpose, bringing together traumatized horses and humans in mutual recovery. The nightmares about Sarah's accident had largely subsided, replaced by dreams of future possibilities. Morgan had transformed as well, balancing her business acumen with renewed connection to the animals that had first drawn her to this world. Under her leadership, Elmwood had become a model for ethical equestrian business practices, proving that compassion and profit could coexist. On a warm spring evening, James stood by the paddock fence watching Thunderbolt graze peacefully alongside several other rehabilitation cases. The sunset painted the Kentucky hills in gold, not unlike that first morning when everything had changed. Morgan joined him, comfortable now in the riding boots that had replaced her executive heels for all but the most formal occasions. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, leaning against the fence beside him. "Just thinking about journeys," James replied. "How the worst day of your life can somehow lead to exactly where you need to be." Morgan nodded, understanding. "I was just speaking with that new veteran group, the Marine with the severe PTSD. He spoke today for the first time since arriving. To his therapy horse." James smiled, the beginning of his way back. "Thanks to you." Morgan's hand found his on the fence rail, a gesture that had become natural over the months of working closely together. Their relationship had evolved gradually, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Neither had rushed, both carrying past wounds that needed time to heal. But something solid had formed between them, a partnership that extended beyond the professional. "Not me," James corrected. "All of us. You, Lily, Thunderbolt, Elena, Frank, even Victor and Wilson in their way. Every piece led here." In the distance, Thunderbolt raised his head, nickering a greeting as Lily approached the paddock. The girl, taller now, more confident, carried her ever-present book, ready for the evening reading session that remained their special ritual. "Your daughter has quite a future in this field," Morgan observed, "natural talent combined with genuine compassion." "She's found her voice," James agreed, "in more ways than one." As Lily settled on the grass, Thunderbolt immediately approached, lowering himself beside her in what had become their customary position for reading time. The massive black stallion and the small girl created a picture of perfect trust, the kind that could only exist when fear had been replaced by understanding. Fear and trust can't exist in the same space, James had taught them all. When you build one, you eliminate the other. In that peaceful Kentucky evening, watching his daughter read to the horse that had changed everything, James Miller knew which one they had chosen to build. And in that choice lay healing not just for a traumatized stallion, but for all of them. The strongest things hadn't been broken. They had been heard. And in that hearing, they had found their way home.